$218. Some numbers a man can forget. This one, Ethan Carter carried everywhere, the way you carry a stone in your shoe that you can never quite shake loose. $218 was the price of the inhaler that actually let his daughter breathe. The real one, the brand name one, sealed behind the pharmacy counter like something holy he was never holy enough to take home. So he bought the generic instead. The cheap one, the one that left Sophie clawing at the dark at 3 in the morning, her small chest heaving, while he knelt beside her bed and promised her things he did not know how to pay for. And that morning, taped to the door of the only home she had ever known, there had been a second number, colder, printed in the flat gray font that governments use when they have stopped seeing you as a person. 72 hours. Settle the balance or be gone. He had folded the eviction notice into careful quarters and pushed it deep into his back pocket, and now, hours later, he could still feel it there, a small square of paper that weighed more than every tray he had carried all night. Because this was the thing no one in the bright, beautiful dining room of Aurelia understood about a man like Ethan. He was not invisible by accident. He had made himself invisible on purpose. It was easier to be furniture than to be pitied. Easier to be the hands that poured the wine than the man who had once 10 years ago worn pressed shirts in a glass tower, before the world decided his name was something shameful, before it took his career and then took Maria, the cancer found too late because they had waited, because waiting had been cheaper than living. What none of them knew, what the woman at table 7 could not possibly have guessed as she lifted her water glass with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, was that the tired waiter clearing the plates beside her was about to hear 3 sentences in a language he was not supposed to understand, and that those 3 sentences would cost him everything or save a child he had never met, depending entirely on what he chose to do in the next 90 seconds. He did not know any of that yet. He only knew his feet had gone numb, which scared him more than pain ever had, and that table 7 held the gravity of a collapsing star. At its head sat Charlotte Hayes. The host had said her name during the briefing the way other people say the names of weather systems. Hayes Medical Supply, the woman who had dragged her dead father's company back from the grave. She did not look like a titan tonight. She looked like someone holding a roof up alone. Her charcoal blazer fit like armor, but her left thumb moved in a small, private circle against the knuckle of her index finger, around and around, as though she could rub the fear down to nothing if she only kept at it long enough. Across from her sat Richard Bennett, occupying his chair the way a predator occupies a clearing, broad, unhurried, certain. He smelled of cedar and inherited money, and when he smiled, only his mouth bothered to join in. Between them sat the translator, Daniel Brooks, a neat, slight man whose smile arrived exactly on schedule and never once climbed as high as his eyes. His English was glass, but when he turned to murmur toward the visitors from Brant Pharma, his German came faster, looser, and unkind. Ethan set down a plate of seafood appetizer. He poured the sparkling water, and he listened because 4 years in Frankfurt had carved that language into his bones, and Daniel Brooks did not know it. What the translator said in German was not what Charlotte had said in English. He told the Germans she was bleeding money and would sign anything put before her. Then he told them the rest, plainly, like a man discussing the weather. Swallow Hayes Medical whole, thin out the cheap respiratory line, stretch the margins until the inhalers were little more than colored air in a plastic shell. The pitcher went cold in Ethan's hand, the respiratory line, the exact medicine keeping his own daughter alive, about to be quietly gutted for profit. Then he looked, really looked, at the translator's face, and somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the fear, something far older stirred, a cold prickle of recognition. He had seen that face before. He simply could not yet remember where. Just pour the water, Ethan. Pour the water and walk away. The voice in his head was the same one that had kept him alive for 10 years. It was the voice of a man with 72 hours and an empty bank account and a daughter asleep across town with a humidifier rattling beside her bed. None of your business. Rich people devouring rich people. Step back into the shadows where you belong. He set the pitcher down on the service station. His pulse was a fist against his ribs. At table 7, Charlotte Hayes drew a heavy silver pen from the inside of her blazer. The cap came off with a soft metallic scrape that seemed, to Ethan, to echo through the entire room. Daniel Brooks slid the leather folder toward her, his soft fingers smoothing the pages flat, and pointed to a line near the bottom of the document. "Mr. Bennett has already signed his portion," Daniel said in his glass-smooth English. "Here and here. The restructuring schedule simply formalizes everything we discussed." Charlotte exhaled. The armor cracked for half a second. Ethan saw her shoulders drop, saw the exhaustion bleed through, saw a woman who believed, for the first time all night, that she had won something. She lowered the pen toward the paper. He thought of Sophie at 3 a.m, fighting for air. He thought of every truck driver and warehouse worker and tired parent who would never know their child's medicine had been quietly hollowed out by men at a dinner table that cost more than a year of rent. Damn it. "Excuse me." The words left him before the cost of them could register. His voice was not loud, but inside the hushed bubble of table 7, it landed like a dropped tray. The pen stopped. 3 faces turned toward him. Charlotte's expression flattened into pure ice. "Is there a problem with the bill?" Ethan stepped forward. He ignored Richard Bennett's narrowing eyes. He ignored Daniel's sudden, sharp little shake of the head. He looked only at Charlotte. "Don't sign that contract." The silence that followed had a temperature. Daniel rose halfway from his chair, his schedule-perfect smile finally collapsing. "Ms. Hayes, I'm so sorry. The staff here have clearly—" "Sit down, Daniel." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The translator dropped back into his seat as though his strings had been cut. Her lethal gaze stayed on Ethan. "You have 5 seconds." So he turned away from her and spoke to the men from Brant Pharma in their own language, fast and clean and edged like a blade. "She knows what you said, every word, that you plan to gut her company, that you intend to thin out the respiratory line until the inhalers are worthless. I heard all of it, and so will the regulators, the moment she walks out that door." The German came out of him precise, regional, unmistakably native, the German of a man who had argued contracts in Frankfurt warehouses, not a phrase book. The visitors went pale. One of them looked at Daniel as though he had just watched a chair stand up and accuse him of murder. Charlotte's eyes moved from their guilty faces to Daniel's bloodless one, and back to Ethan. The pieces fell into place behind her eyes at terrible speed. "Translate," she said quietly. Exactly what he just told them. Daniel lunged for the folder. "Ms. Hayes, you cannot possibly listen to a—" She pressed her hand flat over his, pinning his fingers to the table. "If you open your mouth again, I will have my legal team bury you so deep your grandchildren will inherit the lawsuit." She did not look at him. "Speak," she told Ethan. He spoke. The lie about the bleeding cash. The plan to swallow the company. The respiratory line stretched into colored air. Charlotte flipped to the restructuring page and read in silence for 10 unbearable seconds, and Ethan watched the exhaustion drain out of her and something far more dangerous take its place. Then she lifted her water glass and slowly, deliberately, poured the entire contents across the open contract. The ink of Richard Bennett's signature bloomed and ran, smearing into an illegible blue ruin. "This dinner is over," she said. Bennett surged up, buttoning his jacket, snarling. Daniel scrambled after him, snatching his ruined briefcase, jabbing a trembling finger at Ethan. "You're finished in this city. You hear me?" They were gone within seconds. Eris, the floor manager, was already speed-walking across the room, face purpling, and his hand closed around Ethan's arm like a vice. "You're fired. Out the back, before I call the—" Let go of his arm. Charlotte was standing now, sliding her phone into her coat. Eris froze. She crossed to Ethan, read his name tag, and held out a sleek embossed card. "It seems you just saved me $80 million and 250,000 children's lungs," she said. "And it seems you just lost your job. Call that number, 9 o'clock. The night bus smelled of wet wool and diesel, and Ethan rode it in the back row with his forehead against the cold, trembling glass, the embossed card burning a hole in one pocket, and the eviction notice weighing down the other. 2 pieces of paper. One was a drowning. The other was a life raft tossed from a passing yacht. And he had spent enough years at the bottom to distrust anything thrown by a hand that wore a watch worth more than his car. Billionaires did not hand out kindness. They handed out hooks with bait on them. He knew this the way he knew the ache in his lower back, the way he knew which floorboards in the apartment creaked. He climbed the 3 flights quietly. Inside, the air was warm and damp, thick with the low, rattling hum of the humidifier in the corner. Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor who watched Sophie when his shifts ran long, dozed in the armchair under a worn quilt. He pressed 3 folded bills into her hand at the door, thanked her in a whisper, and let her shuffle back down the hall. Then he stood in the doorway of the bedroom and listened. Sophie was a small lump beneath a faded comforter, her breathing steady, but threaded with a faint residual wheeze that he heard the way other fathers heard music. She coughed once in her sleep, a dry, scraping little sound, and turned over, and his whole chest clenched around it. 8 years old. She had never known a single night without the machine breathing for her in the dark. He went to the kitchen, switched on the harsh overhead light, and laid Charlotte Hayes's card on the chipped Formica table beside the eviction notice. Gold lettering against gray pulp. He sat in the rickety chair and looked at the 2 of them for a long time. $51 in checking, 72 hours on the clock, a high school diploma, a spotty resume, and a name that turned to poison the second anyone in the industry searched for it. And 1 phone number that might be nothing at all. What the hell did I just do? At 8:45 the next morning, he stood in his only suit, navy, bought for a funeral, shiny at the elbows, inside a tower of glass and cold-conditioned air that smelled of espresso instead of garbage. The elevator climbed with a stomach-dropping speed. He expected to be handed to HR. He expected a polite interview and a closed door. Instead, an assistant walked him straight down a hushed corridor and opened a pair of heavy doors onto a corner office that overlooked the gray sprawl of the city. Charlotte Hayes was not behind the enormous desk. She stood at the window with a paper cup of break-room coffee, and she looked worse than she had the night before. Her hair pulled back in a severe, tired knot, the shadows beneath her eyes carved deep. "You're early," she said without turning. "I don't have a job to go to." She turned at that, almost smiling, and crossed to the desk to toss a thick folder so that it slid and stopped precisely at the edge nearest his hands. "I spent the night reading about you, Ethan Carter." His stomach dropped. Frankfurt. 4 years managing pharmaceutical distribution across 2 continents. Compliance, logistics, supplier disputes. You were good. Quietly, unusually good. Her eyes were steady on him. And then, 10 years ago, something happened that I couldn't find the bottom of. The records go strange. Your name goes quiet. "That's not a part of my life I discuss," he said. She let it pass. "For now." "I don't need you to discuss it. I need what you showed me last night. Someone who hears the lie under the words. Someone who cannot be cowed by a suit." She nodded at the folder. "Open it." Behind her on the wall hung a black-and-white photograph of a gray-haired man with kind, tired eyes standing in front of a small warehouse. Ethan's gaze caught on it. "My father," Charlotte said softly. "William Hayes. He built this company from nothing, and then he watched it burn. I rebuilt it from the ashes." Something flickered across her face, old, unhealed. "I don't intend to watch it burn twice." Ethan opened the folder. Director of International Negotiations, and the salary on the second page stole the breath clean out of his chest. Ethan closed the folder. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and the number on the second page, the number that could have ended every sleepless arithmetic of his life, simply fell away from him. "I need health insurance," he said. His voice came out steadier than his hands. "Not in 90 days. Not after a probationary period. Active by midnight tonight. Comprehensive. Top tier." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Most people open with the salary. "I don't care about the salary." The words cracked something open in him, and he let them. "My daughter has chronic asthma. If I'm sitting in your meetings, working your hours, I cannot be doing math in my head about whether one bad night in an emergency room is going to bury us. Insurance tonight, or I walk out that door." It was a bluff with nothing behind it. $51 and 72 hours behind it. If she said no, he had nothing at all. Charlotte studied him for a long, silent moment. The city hummed faintly below the glass. Then she reached into her blazer, drew out the heavy silver pen, leaned over the desk, and scratched a line of text across the contract before initialing it. "HR will process the waiver within the hour," she said. "Your coverage starts at noon." She straightened. "Don't make me regret this, Ethan." "You won't." He picked up the pen. The metal was warm from her hand. He signed his name. The weeks that followed were a collision of two worlds that had no business sharing a room. Charlotte ran her company the way a surgeon runs an operating theater, every motion measured, every variable controlled, nothing left to chance. Ethan had spent 10 years surviving precisely because nothing in his life could ever be controlled. They clashed over everything. She wanted projections. He wanted to watch the man across the table sweat. She called his methods reckless. He called her boardroom a velvet cage where everyone was too polite to notice they were being robbed. "You can't run a negotiation on instinct and a chip on your shoulder," she snapped at him one afternoon after he'd contradicted her in front of a vendor. "And you can't run one by trusting that rich men play fair," he shot back. "I've seen what happens to the people at the bottom when they do." She'd gone quiet at that, and he'd regretted the edge in it, but neither of them apologized. Then came the meeting with the supplier from Lyon. The man was charming, heavily cologned, all white teeth and open palms, and he spoke rapid French to his colleague, while an interpreter handled the room. Ethan understood only fragments of the language, but he was not listening to the words. He was watching the man's hands. He saw the small, telling tightness in the jaw when the topic turned to a clause buried deep in the maintenance schedule. He saw the colleague tap a pen twice against his notepad. Ethan caught Charlotte's eye across the table and gave a microscopic shake of his head. Then he mouthed a single word. "Maintenance." Charlotte did not miss a beat. "Before we go any further," she said, her voice dropping into that cold, commanding register, "I'll need a fully itemized breakdown of the maintenance annex, line by line." The Frenchman's smile faltered. The color left his face. Buried in that annex, they would later find, was a 12% markup folded so cleverly into the fine print that 3 of her own analysts had missed it. Afterward, in the empty break room, she handed him a coffee without being asked. "You saw that from across the room," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "They never look at the man in the corner." "No," Ethan said, "they don't." Something shifted between them then, small, grudging, real. The first warm crack in a wall of ice. It lasted until her assistant appeared in the doorway, pale. "Ms. Hayes, there's a letter from a lawyer." A pause. "Daniel Brooks is threatening to sue." The call came on a Thursday at 9:20. While Ethan was reviewing a contract, he no longer remembered the words of the moment Mrs. Alvarez's name lit up his cracked screen. He knew before he answered. A father always knows. "Ethan." Her voice was thin, frightened. "It's Sophie. The inhaler isn't working. She can't catch her breath, Ethan. I called the ambulance." The world narrowed to a tunnel. He was on his feet before he understood he had stood, the chair clattering behind him, the contract forgotten on the desk. He did not remember the elevator. He did not remember the cab, only the red smear of the city through the window and the driver's voice asking twice if he was all right. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed like something alive. He gave Sophie's name at the desk and was told to wait. And waiting was the cruelest thing they could have asked of him. He sat in a plastic chair under that buzzing light and listened to his own pulse, and somewhere behind a set of doors his daughter was fighting for the air that came free to everyone else in the world. This was the math no money could solve. This was the helplessness he had carried for 10 years made flesh, the knowledge that he could work every shift, skip every meal, hold every roof up alone, and still not be able to breathe for her. The generic inhaler, the one he'd bought because it was cheaper. The thought of it opened a wound in him so deep he had to press the heels of his hands against his eyes to keep from coming apart in the waiting room. He did not call Charlotte. It did not even occur to him. She belonged to the other world, the glass tower world, and this raw animal terror was his alone to carry. But he had mentioned the hospital's name once to her assistant, in passing, weeks ago. She arrived 40 minutes later. He looked up, and she was simply there, standing in the doorway of the waiting room, in a coat thrown over whatever she'd been wearing when the news reached her, her severe knot of hair come loose at the edges. She did not say anything performative. She did not tell him it would be all right. She crossed the room, sat in the plastic chair beside him, and stayed. "I called Dr. Reyes," she said quietly after a while. "Pediatric pulmonology. She's the best in the state. She's downstairs now, and the billing office has my information. You will not see a single page of it. Don't argue with me, Ethan. Not tonight." He turned to look at her, and for the first time the armor was simply gone. There was no CEO in that chair. There was only a woman who knew exactly what it was to sit in a hard plastic seat, while the thing you loved most slipped toward a darkness you could not follow. He understood then that she had sat in a chair like this before. For her father, maybe. For someone. "Why?" he managed. "Because no one should have to do the terrible math alone," she said. "I learned that too late." By dawn, Sophie was breathing, steady, pink-cheeked. The crisis broke like a fever, and when they finally let Ethan into the room, he found his daughter propped up against the white pillows, small and tired and alive, and Charlotte sitting on the edge of the bed, showing her something on her phone that made the little girl laugh, a real laugh, frail but bright. "Daddy," Sophie rasped, delighted. "Charlotte knows the names of all the bones in the hand, all of them." Charlotte glanced up, almost embarrassed, caught being human. And Ethan, standing in the doorway with 10 years of armor cracking quietly down the middle, felt something he had not let himself feel since Maria died. Not gratitude, something far more dangerous than gratitude. They kept Sophie one more night for observation, and somewhere in the small hours, when the girl had finally drifted off with Charlotte's borrowed cardigan tucked under her chin, the two adults found themselves in the hospital's empty courtyard. The city glittered cold and distant beyond the railing. Someone had left 2 paper cups of vending machine coffee on the bench, and they drank them without tasting them, shoulder to shoulder, too tired for the walls they usually kept up. "You didn't have to stay," Ethan said. "Dr. Reyes, the billing, that was already more than anyone's ever done for us. You You could have gone home hours ago." "I know what it does to a person," Charlotte said, watching the steam rise and vanish. "Sitting in a chair like that, waiting for a door to open. I wasn't going to leave you in it alone." He turned the cup in his hands. "You said you learned it too late. The math. Doing it alone." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she set her coffee down on the bench, and when she spoke, her voice had lost every edge it carried in the boardroom. "My father built Hayes Medical from a single warehouse. Decent man, the kind who knew the name of every driver, every packer, every kid working the loading dock for summer money." A faint, sad smile. "He used to say the whole point of medicine was that it reached the people who couldn't pay for it. He believed that. He ran the company like he believed it." "What happened?" "A shipment," she said. 10 years ago. A consignment that came through one of his international suppliers. Falsified. Counterfeit product slipped into a legitimate shipment, documentation forged to make it look clean. When the regulators traced it back, it landed on his desk. His signature was on the chain of custody, somewhere down the line. It didn't matter that he never knew. It didn't matter that he'd been deceived by people he trusted. Her thumb found the knuckle of her index finger again. That old private circle. The company collapsed in a season. The lawsuits, the recalls, the headlines. He had a stroke 6 months into it. He never recovered. He died believing he'd betrayed the very people he spent his life trying to protect. Ethan had gone very still. Something cold was moving through him. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air. A sensation he could not name and did not want to. "They never caught who did it," Charlotte went on quietly. "The man who actually arranged it walked away clean. Disappeared into the machinery, the way those men always do. I rebuilt the company so that it could never happen again. So that no one could ever poison what we make. That's why the respiratory line matters so much to me, Ethan. It's the cheap one. It's the one that reaches the people who can't pay. It's the one my father would have died to protect." She let out a breath. "And it's the one Richard Bennett tried to gut at that dinner table. You understand now why I poured water on his contract instead of signing it." "I understand," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. She looked at him then, really looked, and the distance between them, the glass tower and the night bus, the billionaire and the waiter, seemed for the first time not like a gulf, but like two people standing on opposite sides of the same scale, both of them holding far too much weight. "You're the only person I've told that," she said, surprised at herself. "The whole story, in 10 years. Why me?" "Because you carry it too," she said simply. "I can see it on you. Whatever happened 10 years ago that you won't talk about, you carry it the exact same way." He did not answer. He could not, because somewhere in the dark the pieces of two ruined lives had just begun, silently, to fit together. And only one of them yet knew the shape they made. Richard Bennett did not stay gone for long. Men like him never did. The first sign was a filing, a shell company quietly accumulating Hayes Medical stock through intermediaries. Charlotte recognized the architecture of a second assault when she saw it, and she did what she always did when threatened. She went back to the beginning. She pulled the old files, the original collapse, the shipment that had killed her father, 10 years buried, because she had learned long ago that the men who came for you twice always came the same way they came the first time. It was past midnight in the corner office, the photograph of William Hayes watching from the wall, when she found it. The chain of custody manifest, the falsified consignment, the forged documentation that had ruined a decent man. And there, near the bottom of the 3rd page, a signature confirming receipt of the shipment at the distribution point in Frankfurt. Ethan Carter. The pen stilled in her hand. The room went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet just before something breaks. She read the name again and again. She told herself it was a coincidence, a different man, a common enough name. And then she pulled his employment file, the one she had read the night after Aurelia, and laid the signatures side by side under the desk lamp. The same hand, the same small flourish on the final letter. The man who had saved her company. The man who had sat beside her in a plastic hospital chair. The man whose daughter wore her cardigan. His name was on the document that had killed her father. She called him in at 7 the next morning. He arrived early, the way he always did, and she watched him cross the office with that careful, invisible walk. And for a moment she hated how glad some part of her still was to see him. She slid the manifest across the desk. "Explain this." He looked down. She watched the color drain out of his face in real time, watched 10 years of something he had buried claw its way back to the surface. He did not pretend not to understand. That, at least, she would give him. "Charlotte, don't." Her voice was glass over ice. "That's your signature, on the shipment that destroyed my father. The shipment you knew about. You sat in this hospital with me. You let me tell you the whole story, and you said nothing." "I didn't know it was your father's company," he said, and the words came out hoarse, desperate. "I swear to you, I didn't make the connection until just now. Charlotte, I was a logistics coordinator. They handed me a manifest and told me to confirm receipt. Routine paperwork, hundreds of them a week. A man I reported to said it was just procedure, just a formality. Sign here and move on. I trusted him. I didn't read what I was signing because I had no reason to think—" "My father didn't read it either," she said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle. That was exactly his defense, and it didn't save him. He died of it, Ethan. He died believing he'd poisoned the people he loved, and your name is on the paper that did it. I was used. The guilt rose in him like floodwater, drowning every word. I know that doesn't bring him back. I know it doesn't undo a single thing. They burned me too, my career, my name, everything. I spent 10 years paying for a signature I didn't understand. But God, Charlotte, if I had known— Get out! Charlotte, get out of my office. She would not look at him. She could not. The thumb pressed white against the knuckle. I trusted you. I let Sophie near me. Get out. He stood. There was nothing left to say that would not be cruelty dressed as comfort. He walked to the door with the same invisible walk that had carried him through 10 years of being no one, and at the threshold he stopped and did not turn around. He sounds like he was a good man, Ethan said quietly. Your father. I'm sorry I ever touched his life. Then he was gone, and the office was silent, and Charlotte sat alone with 2 signatures and the ruin of everything she had let herself begin to hope for. Charlotte did not sleep. She sat with the manifest until the office filled with gray morning light, and somewhere in those hours her grief began, slowly, to turn into something colder and more useful. Because grief asks why, and a CEO who has rebuilt a company from ashes does not stop at the first answer she is handed. His signature was on the page. But a signature was not a plan. Someone had built the trap. Someone had chosen Ethan Carter to put his name on it. She started pulling the threads no one had pulled in 10 years. The supplier who had introduced the falsified consignment had used an intermediary, a fixer, a smoother of rough edges, a man who arranged the paperwork and managed the people and made certain the right signature landed on the right line. He had been listed in the old records under a company name, then a second company name, then nothing at all. He had vanished into the machinery, exactly as she'd told Ethan in the courtyard. The man who actually arranged it walked away clean. It took her until noon to find the photograph. An old trade conference badge, archived in a German industry database, a face beside a name from a decade ago. Daniel Brooks, younger, thinner hair on top, not less. But the same neat features, the same smile that arrived on schedule and never reached the eyes. The translator at her own table, the man who had sat 18 inches from her at Aurelia, quietly twisting an honest negotiation into a grave for her company. He was the same man who had engineered the original fraud, the same man who had killed her father by proxy and framed a logistics coordinator named Ethan Carter to take the fall. He had not stumbled into her life twice by accident. He had been circling Hayes Medical for 10 years, and Richard Bennett's shell company was simply the second act of a play Daniel Brooks had been staging since the beginning. She understood then, with a clarity that made her ill, exactly what had been done to both of them. Daniel had needed a name to bury the fraud beneath, and he had chosen a junior coordinator with no power to fight back. The same disposable man, ground up and discarded, that the machine always chose. Ethan had not destroyed her father. Daniel Brooks had destroyed them both with the same stroke of a borrowed pen. She found him that evening at the diner 3 blocks from his apartment, the only place open, nursing a coffee he couldn't afford to refill. He looked up when the bell over the door rang, and his face when he saw her was a wound trying to brace itself. She sat down across from him. "You were the second victim," she said, "not the perpetrator, the second victim." He said nothing, waiting, not daring to hope. Daniel Brooks. She watched the name land. "He arranged the shipment that killed my father. He chose your signature to hide behind. He's been moving through international deals for 10 years, doing the same thing again and again, and now he's working with Richard Bennett to take Hayes Medical a second time." Her voice steadied. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I looked at one page and I convicted you of the worst thing in my life. My father read one page too few, I read one too many, and stopped. I'm sorry." For a long moment he only looked at her. Then something shifted in his expression, and he reached into the inside pocket of the funeral suit he still wore to work and laid a worn, folded envelope on the table between them. "10 years ago," he said, "after they hung it all on me, I knew something was wrong. I didn't understand the whole shape of it, but I kept a copy. The original manifest before it was altered. The instruction I was given, in writing, telling me to sign without reviewing. The name of the man who gave it." He pushed it toward her. "I've carried it through 3 apartments and 1 eviction. I never knew what to do with it. I didn't even know who to trust." Charlotte opened the envelope with hands that were not quite steady, and there, in faded 10-year-old ink, was the thread that tied everything together. A name written in the corner of a routing instruction. D. Brooks. She looked up at him. Across a chipped diner table, 2 people who had each spent a decade carrying the same buried weight finally set it down between them. "Then let's bury him with it," she said, and held out her hand. Ethan took it. They built the trap the way Daniel Brooks had taught them, without meaning to. Charlotte's lawyers and forensic accountants spent 2 weeks tracing the shell company back through its layers, and the old envelope from Ethan's funeral suit gave them the one thing they had never possessed: a beginning. The original manifest, unaltered, the written instruction to sign without review, the routing note signed in the corner, D. Brooks, in ink 10 years old. With that thread in hand, the whole tapestry came apart. The string of international deals, the pattern of disposable signatures, the companies he had hollowed, and the people he had buried beneath their own names. They did not confront Daniel in a boardroom. They invited him to one, him and Richard Bennett both, under the pretense of reopening negotiations. And when the 2 men sat down across the long table, certain they were closing a second kill, Charlotte slid a folder toward them instead of a contract. Inside was everything, 10 years of it. Richard Bennett went gray. Daniel Brooks's smile arrived, exactly on schedule, and for the first time it had nowhere to go. "The regulators have copies," Charlotte said pleasantly. "So does the press. So does the federal attorney who has wanted your name for a very long time, Mr. Brooks. You should have stayed gone. The network unraveled in a single season, faster, even than her father's company had fallen. The arrests made the financial pages. The respiratory line, the cheap one, the one that reached the people who could not pay, was protected in perpetuity by a clause Charlotte wrote herself and named after William Hayes. And Ethan Carter, after 10 years of carrying a stranger's crime, was cleared, his record corrected, his name returned to him, the shame he had worn like a second skin, finally, quietly, lifted away. He found Charlotte in the corner office afterward, beneath her father's photograph. "It's over," he said. "It's over," she agreed. And then, because she had spent a decade learning that the math should never be done alone. "I was wrong about you in every way that mattered, Ethan. I let one page make me a fool. I don't intend to make that mistake about my own heart." She crossed the room. "I love you. I think I have since you told me not to sign." 3 months later, on a Saturday, on a stretch of sand below a weathered gray house at the edge of Cape Cod, Ethan got down on one knee in front of the two people he loved most in the world. Sophie watched, breathless, the good kind of breathless now, the ordinary kind. And when Charlotte said yes, the little girl flung herself forward and wrapped both arms around her. "Charlotte," Sophie whispered into her shoulder, "can I call you Mom?" And Charlotte, who had rebuilt an empire from ashes and never once cried where anyone could see, put her face in the child's hair and wept. That winter, in the bright kitchen of the house by the sea, Sophie's brand name inhaler sat on the counter, fully covered, every refill, the $218 that had once governed Ethan's every waking hour, now nothing at all, a number that had lost its power over them. No eviction notice, no terrible arithmetic at the kitchen table at 3 a.m, only the sound of waves and his daughter breathing easily in the next room, and a woman he loved setting 2 cups of coffee on the table without being asked. The weight he had carried for 10 years was simply gone. And here is what this story leaves us with. The people the world overlooks, the tired waiter, the invisible hands, the ones who pour the wine and are never thanked, often carry more courage and more decency than anyone seated at the table. Speaking the truth can cost you everything in a single moment, but silence in the end costs far more. Kindness given freely when no one is watching and nothing is owed has a way of finding its way home. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes that good people deserve good endings. We pour our hearts into telling these stories, and we would love for you to stay with us. There's a new one waiting for you every single day. And now we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever spoken up when it would have been so much easier to stay silent? Have you ever received kindness from a stranger that changed the course of your life? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one, and there is nothing we treasure more than hearing what these stories stir up in the deepest part of your heart. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing this journey with us. We wish you good health, a peaceful heart, and a life filled with quiet joy and gentle days. Take care of yourself and take care of the people who depend on you. Until next time, goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.